Hello, Dragon Slayer, and I'm being joined today by my biblical scholar, cousin, and social observer, Michael Dallen. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Tom. Dr. Tom.
If we want to support our project, you could purchase The Rainbow Covenant, wonderful book, and Dragon Slaying, a book about recovering from trauma, among other things. It's all about heroes. So, Mike, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, can you explain the rash of anti-Semitism that is growing in this country?
Well, since October 7th, one of the happiest days of the year, it was Simchas Torah, the holiday that ends the high holidays. Uh, Literally, Simchas Torah is joy in Torah. And on that day, it's been 2 years now, Hamas attacked in what was attempted to be a coordinated attack with Hezbollah and Iran and the Houthis in Yemen to cause all the devastation that they could to Israel, to make the Jewish project in the land of Israel fail, to drive the people out and as much as possible, and to kill, to maim. And they attacked a very secular gathering of young people who were partying. They weren't at all religious, but they were spiritual, and they were having a rave in the middle of the desert, an area that I know. It's in the south towards Gaza. It's the historic land of Israel. It's been Israel since the very beginning, but as you know, I think um, the 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 point of Palestinianism is that there is no Jew who belongs in the land of Israel, and certainly not as the masters of the land. And this is called Green Line Israel. That it wasn't acquired by conquest in defense of war in '67. It's the original land of Israel, and they didn't care. To them, all the Jews are occupiers. The whole land belongs to them, Arabs, only Arabs, and that the Jews are interlopers, imperialists, colonialists, and all the other stupid stuff that they say. And that,
So I'm curious about that. What do they know about the historical antecedents of the land?
well, it's a cognitive dissonance with them. I mean, they know that all these features of the land are known as Moses's footstool, Moses's seat, Aaron's and Miriam's fountain. The Jews have left their names on all these features and the wadis and roads and things in the land, and they're aware of that. Nonetheless, they feel that whoever these people are, they're not really Jews, is one of the arguments. They come up with a whole bunch of just a rat's nest of anti-Semitic baloney arguments that excuses their whatever they want to do in order to drive out the hated Jews.
But the troublesome thing about it is that these arguments, phony or not, seem to have some currency with the American left and with American academics.
Well, the weird thing is, when the Jews were in Europe, the, the Jew haters would tell them, "You don't belong here. Go to Palestine. Go to the Holy Land. You have no place here. You don't belong here." So then, once the Jews do go to Palestine, to the land of Israel, the lesson is, no, you should go back to Poland. Poland is their usual designation. You don't belong here. But the land is not the Arabs. We're talking about a land the size of Jersey, for crying out loud. We're talking about a land that is smaller than Lake Michigan in the vastness of the Arab world. all the Arabs have to do, and this is the Arabs, not the Palestinians. This is the concerted might of 22 Arab nations, including the Palestinians, that have about a fifth of the planet at their disposal. Um, and they're jealous of this tiny little land that was a horrible land. According to Mark Twain, who came there in 1867, just after the Civil War, it was a devastated land. It was malarial, it was swampy, it was dry, it was desert, and only the thing that gets me most about all of the lies is as 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 a servant, I hope, of the Lord God. He laid down black letter prophecies about what would happen to the land when the Jews were not there. And those prophecies are that the land would enjoy its Sabbaths because there would be no Jews there and no one else would pick up the baton. No other people would make that land flourish. And that is indeed what happened. The land was a howling desert. There were very few Arabs in that land, and they didn't regard it as a place to be. They regarded it as a cursed land, a land full of Jewish ghosts. And this, a lot of pious Muslims will tell you, this isn't our land. This is the Jews' land. The Koran says it's the Jews' land. Nonetheless, the message resonates. The idea that the Jews are like European settlers and the Arabs are the indigenous people, the Red Indians, as it were. And there's one lie after another. I remember the distinguished Palestinian diplomat Hanan Ashrawi was saying, well, we're the Canaanites. Others say, well, we're the Philistines. In fact, the name Palestinian is based on the idea of being Philistines. And if you know anything about the Bible, you would know you don't want to be called after the Philistines, the most horrible, vile people ever. But they're not Canaanites and they're not Philistines. They're Arabs, which literally means, the name comes from the Romans. It designated vagabonds, wanderers. But they can't wander here because this is their land, they're told. They're subsidized to believe this, to say it. It's a wild, concerted fraud. I know these are extreme sounding words, but every one is just dead on.
It is actually, it has foundation in the history that you and I have been taught, and history that we know. Why does the anti-Semitic rhetoric have so much currency in American universities right now?
Well, there's this idea that the West is evil and that the West has nothing much to offer humanity and that the indigenous peoples, there is that. Well, that's called self-hate. That's called liberal self-hate. And that's a repudiation of the past of Western man, that it is based on, it focuses only on the evil parts of Western history and doesn't point out, the Benjamin Franklins and the Thomas Jeffersons and the Washingtons and the courageousness and the gutsiness and the freedoms.
So it's as if our history has been recast.
Well, it's extraordinarily ahistorical. It is a rejection of history by people who haven't really bothered to read it much, but they do have the sense that if it's Western, it's no good. There is that, but there's another thing here, and that's they're dealing with the Jews, and in order to appreciate the Jews and what the Jews have done and the role of the Jews in human history, going back to the pyramids, you've got to know some history, and there's this idea that history is just lies, that it was written by the West, that it was written by slaveholders and whatnot. So there's a lot of self-hate in all of this. But the Jews have set themselves up to be judged by the highest possible standards, because that's what the Bible says. The Jews are, kind of like the Bible says, the apple of God's eye, his special instrument to try to bring civilization to the nations. My neighborhood newsletter, written by a fellow who is Jewish forebears, but is definitely not Jewish himself, very left-wing UAW guy, who goes on about the genocide perpetrated by the Jews, and he calls Israel a colonialist project. That the Jews are coming back to the land of Israel, to the ancient homeland of the Jews, and that is supposedly colonialist. That the Arabs who built their temple, their shrine, Al-Aqsa, on the ruins of the Jewish temple are the indigenous people, and the people who built the foundations are actually aliens with no real connection to the land. It's risible.
Well, that was echoed. That was echoed in Barack Obama's foreign policy, the capitulation to Iran and so on.
Well, I didn't see Barack Obama as one of history's bad guys. Quite the contrary. But well, let me tell you about an article I'm cooking up now, and it is a response to the New Yorker's piece on these books on anti-Semitism. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if you can see.
But let me get back to your perspective on Obama. Obama has said that he's viewed Israel as a colonial power.
If he'd said that, I would freak right out, because I would hope. But you would hope he would know better. I'm pointing out this article by Ian Baruma, who is an extreme. That's a picture of Eichmann. May his name be erased. And the article, the piece is, I've seen it advertised all over. You people, anti-Semitism and its tangled meetings, by a brilliant guy. He teaches a professor at Bard. Wrote a lot of books, one of which I certainly appreciate. And he's saying that anti-Semitism, and these other books he's reviewing, that anti-Semitism just got started with Christianity, and anti-Semitism. This is Christianity only started after 2 of the Jews' temples were destroyed. That you had violent, horrible anti-Jewish riots across the Roman world and across the Greek world. The Jews were slaughtered en masse. Hadrian tried to kill the Jews every time he turned around. The Nazis looked to the Romans as models of trying to kill off the Jews. And you have a really bright guy like this who comes up with this historical solecism, this ridiculous, risible proposition that it began with Christianity. And then it's when you're talking about the Jews, weird things happen. It's strange. People with great brains seem to lose their brains. In this, they're talking about how Bibi Netanyahu, the current prime minister, the leader of Israel now, and what they call the settler movement, is trying to occupy Arab lands, and how did the land get to be Arab? How did a people put their name on this land where that it never belonged to Arabs? It belonged to the Turks. It belonged to other successors of the Jews who never made a go of it in the land. It became Arab. How did that happen? And how did it lose its Jewish identity? A lot of this is reaction to the whole biblical scheme of things, and we have atheism and a rejection of Western religion in all of this, because Western religion, including Islam, actually teaches that this little land, this Jersey-sized acreage, is the Jews, and it's the homeland of the Jews. The idea is that the Jews are to build on this little land an exemplary society there, and this is rejected. If if the Jews are right about this, if this happens, this would be an affirmation of biblical religion, and people, these people do not want that. I mean, and to them, a return of biblical religion be a return of Simon Legree and the slaveholders, and all these other defamations against, the West, and so they certainly don't want that. Um, but uh,
But Michael, it almost appears as if you identify someone as Jewish, and if Jews are your target, you can mobilize almost any fantasied crime that fits that target. You find me the man, I find you the crime.
oh yeah, sure. Yeah. No, the communists hate the Jews because they're capitalists. The capitalists hate the Jews. The right hates the Jews because they're communists. You know, um, you you find new theories all over the place of capitalist communists. George Soros, one of the world's leading, capitalists, is a communist. In the eyes of the right. Um, but there are some odd things going on here. You got to remember, we're talking about the Jews, who are a tiny, tiny people. I mean, a fraction of not remotely 1% of the world's population. I think it's point oh 03 of the world's population, a 0.3% of the world's population, who gave us things like Google and Oracle and Facebook, um, and um, Sam Altman's Chat GPT. I mean, this is weird. It,
As well as the polio vaccines.
yeah, I mean, just one thing. Marx, Freud, LaSalle, all these leaders, um, just a great preponderance of Nobel Prize winners, of achievers. Pulitzer, Joseph Pulitzer was a Jewish guy, um, and the Guggenheims made their fortune. They were bare-assed pardon me, but they were impoverished immigrants, not unlike our dear forebears from Lithuania, who came here and became rich as Croesus, but rich beyond the dreams of Midas. In California, in Colorado, silver and copper, of all things. So you had the Guggenheims. I mean, you've got this in every town. You've got cultural riches, and the Jews are Jewish people. I mean, it's not like we're a single entity. We're extremely disparate people with all kinds of agendas. Um, who was Alice B. Toklas's friend and lover? Gertrude Stein. Gertrude Stein. I mean, and and she drove T.S. Eliot nuts. T.S. Eliot wrote a poem, "The Wasteland," where he's complaining. This anti-Semitic, brilliant guy from St. Louis, who picked up anti-Semitism there and from the British, who's going on about, well, and whatever it is in the world, the Jew is underneath the lot, like rats, at the foundations of things. But you find in the world that there are Jews behind almost everything that's good, including, like, you as a physician, you're focused on the polio vaccine, and that's a pretty good one. But if anybody who's ever had herpes has the vaccine cooked up by a guy named Horowitz at my alma mater at Wayne State. you know. And Horowitz was not a Buddhist or a Christian or a Confucianist either. You know, we could count him in any minion, you know.
Well, another question I had is this is echoed in other parts of the world. For example, I believe a century ago, New York City housed the highest concentration of Jewish people in the world. It was the home of more Jews than any other place. Now, apparently, the Jews are fleeing New York. The old neighborhoods that were once identified as Jewish neighborhoods are no longer there. Uh, New York Jews have fled for Texas, for Florida, and there's a very hollow population, hollowed out population of Jews, which might explain the phenomenon of the election of a backbencher, who I guess is from Uganda, to be New York's next mayor.
Well, I kind of like the guy because he knows persecution. I mean, the Ugandans kicked out all the Asians, the Muslims, and the Indians, you know, and just viciously. It was just cold, awful racism. They just wanted to purge them, to expropriate them, to grab their riches. I remember when it happened. I was traveling with some people who'd been expropriated. Um, so I kind of like a leader who knows what it is to suffer. So I don't know if this guy does, but um, I don't know. There's a lot of very successful Jews in and around New York. Jews keep coming there. I don't know, Tommy. Last night I was studying some Torah, but I was listening to Rihanna, and she had a song that I heard in the gym that I really liked, and I'm playing it obsessively. SOS. And it's new, it's different, it goes on and on. It's just hypnotic. So, you know, and I looked it up. Who produced this? You know, I was thinking, boy, I wish, you know, we all could take credit for it. You know, like you know, Phil Spector left behind a record like Epstein, you know, but I mean, you know, a doo-wop, doo-wop, you know, I mean, that was this brilliant Jewish guy, and these crazy sounding songs came from the Brill Building with, you know, these Jewish artists. And I'm listening to this song, and who's responsible for that? And geez, can I remember his name? His middle name is Ruvain, and then Jonathan Ruvain. I forget the last name, but his folks were Israeli, and he was born in South Africa, and you know, and they're Jews, and he is the chief writer and producer of the song, along with a famous record producer who took him in hand, named Ira Katz. You know, and I mean, so you see this again and again. I mean, and it's got to scare non-Jews. You know, like, what is going on here? What do these people have? And this article about anti-Semitism was going on about the Japanese had been exposed to the protocols of the elders of Zion. You know, this forgery that, you know, Henry Ford sent it around. Good old Henry Ford, our fellow Detroiter, sent it around the world. You know, he discovered this czarist forgery of complete lunacy. You know, of how the Jews were getting together and they were teaching people to build subways, which the Jews, you know, these elders of Zion, were then going to pack with explosives and blow up. You know, the whole movement to build subways was a Jewish plot, in other words, to destroy these cities. It's nuts, you know, it's just completely nuts. But the Japanese were exposed to this when they penetrated Manchuria and Russia. So when the Jews were trying to escape the Nazis and coming to Japanese occupied China, to Shanghai, the Japanese were very cautious, because if they didn't want to mess with the people that powerful as portrayed in the protocols of the elders of Zion, so they let them come in because they didn't want to get on their bad side. you know. So, so you never know. I was in Korea recently, and the Koreans have been teaching Gemara, Torah, Talmud to their little ones, their few little ones that uh, they're a rapidly aging population, with not a lot of kids, but the kids who are there get schooled a little bit in Torah because the Koreans are convinced that the Jews know something, and we need to plug into that and figure it out and make it our own. Except, the Jews' secret sauce is adherence, allegiance to the God of Abraham, the God of Israel, the God of kindness. There is a religion here, a faith, a structure of faith. And there's another thing. And I just realized this last night as I was listening to SOS and Rihanna belting it out, this Jewish song. Who knew? And in our last Torah portions, we're wrapping up. This is the new year now, as you know. The Rosh Hashanah has come. We're wrapping up the annual reading of the 5 books of Moses, the very core of biblical faith. We're in Deuteronomy, the last book, and Moses is saying goodbye, and he's trying to sum up. And this is not Moses as a recording secretary, the prophet to the king of the universe. This is Moses as writing for himself, teaching what he knows, what he's learned in 40 years in the desert. And it's a very powerful warning. And he's saying, you got to do what I'm telling you to do. And as to these people in the land, you've got to understand, you've got to do what I told you before. There's a cross reference to previous instructions, and it is to deal with any foreign claimants to the land, who want to compete with the Jews in possession of the land and ownership of the land. Annihilate them, destroy, eliminate. That's one thing. And two, it's an interesting word. It's yaresh, like Yarusha, inheritance. But it doesn't mean inheritance exactly. It means dispossess to inherit. You must detach them, dispossess them. You must eliminate, make their claims to the land void, a canceled order. And that word yaresh is used again and again and again and again. And the idea is that the land of Israel is something for the Jews to take, and to not take it all and do what Moses was saying would be a slap in the face, as it were, of the king of the universe. Yaresh is actually a value. And we have not taught that. I have never heard that. And I just happened to see it, and then I ran a quick computer search, and that word, that concept comes up uncountable times. And the Jews are a people who are very easygoing when it comes to neighbors. Much of the point of Judaism is that you recognize the godly in your fellow man, whatever his or her race or creed or gender inclinations are, that you recognize the human in the other. And this goes back so far. I was mad at that article because they're talking about anti-Semitism coming up only with Christianity. But the Romans and the Greeks hated the Jews because the Jews kept pulling the plug on what they loved to do. The Romans long ago stopped doing human sacrifices because they learned from the Torah that it was disgusting, you know, and they became these big proponents of Torah values in the world, you know. Freud says that because of all that, the Jews, you know, they got a superego from the Jews, you know, they got their morals and they resented it, you know. But the Judaism, the religion of Abraham, has been shaped the world for about 1,300 years before the Jewish God Jebus came along, um, and it's a force. But we don't always teach. In fact, we're not teaching what we're here for. Um, you know, my book is about the seven Noahide laws, and I wrote it because I'd never encountered a decent exposition of the seven Noahide laws. Everything I'd read about it, I mean, I read good stuff about it, but it was usually contained in a bunch of garbage and a bunch of nonsense about, um, the Nazis heard about these seven laws that we have recently begun to propound and feel that it's a Jewish plot to conquer the world. And there are ways people speak about it that it sounds like that, and they're just common sense laws based on the principle that man is made in the image of God, and God has a high regard for us, and that certain principles like the pain of animals, the world is real, you know.
I, th- I think the Noetic laws, though, have been reverberate throughout the Old Testament.
It's the core of Yeah, it's the core of all, the 613 law.
The other comment I'd make about Deuteronomy is I haven't spoken to Moses, maybe you have, but I suspect
Uh, Eleanor Roosevelt.
I suspect that part of what he was saying in this is that this is a legacy from our Lord, and you do not squander this. This is precious. You are responsible for holding on to this legacy.
Yes. Well, I was talking to our cousin, the late Martha Leviant, and I'd never really talked to Martha, and she was talking about visiting our forebears on East Palmer. You know, she'd come with her dad, our Uncle Max, and she was saying that Eliyahu, our forebear, was a yeshiva bacher. He was an old man, and all he wanted to do was pray and study Torah, and he was committed to this movement. That these folks were steeped in it. They believed in it, and they weren't. And it wasn't because they were benighted, superstitious fanatics, but because they'd been in the world and they learned a few things, and they appreciated what it is, that it stands out in the world as. I look at the way the Jews have succeeded in some respects in the world. Um, Torah has given us a great advantage. I was talking to a friend in the Y at the gym, and he was going on about how awful the world is, and he's expecting the world to end within 3 or 5 years, and he expects to be raptured up. So I was trying to get him to sell me, all his worldly goods on the cheap,
Ah!
you know, and I mean, you run into these crazy Gentiles all the time, and they have these debilitating beliefs that make them, um, I mean, they're putting themselves in the role of chumps in the world against those who have a morally superior um, outlook, or a truer outlook, a superior cosmology.
but yet, as they adhere to their path, I would say they are moral. They're just praying. Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. No, this guy's the nicest guy. I don't know that you could count on him because he's thinking the world will end, in a jiffy. He may not plan for the future the way somebody who thinks the world is going to be around for a while would do. But
So I want to make one comment about you and your life as you are referring to Elihu, your great grandfather, my grandfather. Should he come back, I would suspect that he would be incredibly proud of you. That is, you adhere to the path perhaps most rigorously of anyone in the family that I know of.
well, I think he would like me to succeed in my mission of teaching these laws and of explicating them and sharing them with others. Yeah. But
Well, that's what we're hoping we're doing every.
it's our common mission. Um, and it's an eminently worthy one. But everything with the Jews is perils of Pauline. Are we going to succeed in this before the coming Holocaust? And normally we don't. Normally the Holocaust catches up with us. This article is going on about Ben-Zion Netanyahu. That's Bibi Netanyahu's dad, who died at, I think, 107 or 105. He was a great scholar of the Spanish Inquisition, and he was saying that the Spanish Inquisition and the Nazis too, they were just some of the Holocausts of the Jews. They come periodically. Um, and
So his argument is that there's a rhythm to it.
there's a yeah, and
Well, my fear is,
a dynamic of history.
are we coming upon another resurgence of this epidemic, and what impact is that going to have?
Oh yeah, yeah, obviously, yeah, for sure, yeah. Well, we worried about that with the people of Israel, with the recreation of this is the third Jewish Commonwealth, and a lot of anti-Zionist Jews were saying, well, look, this is just going to lead to trouble. But we couldn't just stay spread out, powerless among the nations, because we saw that's not a viable business plan. Um, and when you look at the recreation of Israel, of the resettlement of the Jews in Israel, if you can look at some of the stories and not see that there's godlike influences, providence involved, I'll give you a cigar. I mean, it's just wild um, the way the way Israel shaped up. I remember being in a military warehouse. I was volunteering for service, and I'm reading about these Jews in the 1920s and the 1930s who became um, Zionists, and including the guy who sued Henry Ford successfully, and it got him for defamation. And Ford folded like a deck of cards, like a house of cards, But all these different people, and they didn't start out as Zionists, but they ended up as Zionists because they were convinced by one thing or another that the Jews had to have this uh, political power in the world, a military, um, and a place to be relatively safe in the world. And now, but we're all over the map. My buddy was talking. A buddy of mine was going on about these Jewish leaders who were saying, "Well, look, I don't want to invest any money in Israel. I figure the country is a goner. It's just not going to make it." Um, you get that. Um, you get all these religious leaders talking to another friend and these guys don't want to rebuild a temple in Jerusalem. They don't want to return to the old rhythms of agricultural life. They want to stay in Lakewood, New Jersey, or Muncie, New York, and sit and study Torah, the legal principles, and they don't want to be involved in the messy business of nation building and nation keeping. And I mean, we have our marching orders, and we constantly stray from them because that's the nature of the human, But we have that. But Tommy, I was really flabbergasted when I got the basis of these new articles that what we have here, Yaresh, is this value of inheritance and disinheritance, and inheriting for the Jews and disinheriting any competition in this area that is the size of Jersey. Let us remember that if the Arab League tried to pulled their people back 20 or 40 miles from the land of Israel, there would be no conflict. There'd be no competition. 40 lousy miles. And they you have the entirety of the Arab world with sun-drenched deserts that could be as productive as the Imperial Valley in California if you just applied yourself to its cultivation and maybe worked with the Jews to see what you could do with it. And they don't want to do that. What they want to do is attack the religion that makes their religion looks degenerate, which I don't know what we can get away with in this podcast, but
well, Michael, I'd like to, as we close, I'd like to flip it a little bit. Assuming that the world had an open mind, if you look at the miracle, the transformation since 1948 of what has occurred in Israel, what can we learn? We can learn a great deal about desalinization. We can learn a great deal about reclaiming land, about energy efficiency, about technology, and so on. That is, there are lessons to be learned from this if people were willing to look at that template and say, I wonder how we can adapt this.
well, remember in our own time in the 80s, you had Shimon Peres and others hoping that one day Israel would be like a Singapore, a trading center in the Middle East, and would have a new basis, an economic basis. And instead of a Singapore, it became the Silicon Wadi. It became, infinitely more rich than if it were just a lousy Singapore. But I mean, we had the influx of all these Russians, these chess playing Russians. They were saying that the land of Israel sank about like 6 inches from the weight of all the pianos that the Russians brought into the land, you know, and all these chess whizzes, and these mathematically minded physicists, coming to Israel, and they're I mean, these are the people of Sergey Brin, and who's the other Google guy, you know, uh, or Sam Altman of Chat GPT, you know, um, or Zuckerberg, or Larry Ellison, or of Oracle, or these other guys. I mean, obviously the Jews are riddled with dumb people, but we have great range, and not all of us are that dumb. Um, and there's a formula there. There is a formula in it, and again, I remember. Who was it? It was one of the great Dawkins, the great atheist. The other great atheist was Christopher Hitchens, very famous, incisive writer. he was a Jewish Christopher. So, but he was one of the leading atheists, and the other was Dawkins, the um, um, DNA guy. And somebody showed him these data points of the Jews and Nobel Prizes, and he was shocked. He had no idea. Um, and you would think that somebody who'd been flapping his mouth about there is no God would have known something about the Jews in the world, and you'd be wrong. He didn't. And he was breathless. These are very significant data points, And so he's still an atheist, right? If he's alive, um, but these are very significant data points, and it behooves the world to attend to them, and which I did. I mean, that was I was an atheist, and I saw some of these data points, and it convinced me there's the God of Israel, the God of freedom, is real. Um, However people mischaracterize him and however they defame him, underneath it all, there is an extraordinarily good God, a God of justice and right. And he's given us really interesting directions, including try to turn this land into a land where the Gentiles who are there, um, whatever their nationality, pledge allegiance to Israel as an expression of God's will. And it exists for the glory of God.
Michael, as you know, I'm keenly interested in what makes for heroes in heroic stories because I think these are quite inspiring. And one of my laments about the reframing of American history and the discarding of biblical lessons is that kids no longer are exposed to heroic stories, meaningful heroic stories. So I'd like to tee you up for our next conversation, I hope next week,
Okay.
to tell us a bit about what are some of the more heroic stories that inspired you as you read through the Bible.
Okay. Sounds great. Looking forward to that.
I, you know, I'm thinking about the first great shipbuilder, Noah, as the beginning of a heroic story.
No, it was all right. Uh, my Abe, the rabbis talk about Adam Rishon, Adam the first, as having these wonderful qualities. That's all legendary stuff. But we had Moses, the great revolutionary, and man, now there was a man. But I remember Bismarck, the Chancellor of Germany, the great founder of German nationalism and everything else, was looking at Disraeli. Um, and Disraeli had been converted. His grandfather was a rabbi, and his father got spurned by a synagogue. So he decided in a huff, to hell with that. We're going to be Anglicans now. And so Disraeli was a Jew who be Disraeli. I mean, he was the one who was insulted in Parliament by you Jew, 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 and he's going on about while the right honorable members ancestors were painting themselves blue and living in caves, mine were priests in the Temple of Solomon. You know, uh, and he had a lot of quips, but I remember Bismarck going on about Disraeli, and he's saying in German, and I don't have the German, but der alte Jid, he's some mensch,
Okay.
you know, the old Jew, he's some man, and
Okay. Well, let this be a lesson to us all. So, all you out there that are following the podcast, we wish you well. read some books, try dragon slaying, try the Rainbow Covenant, and many others. Look forward to catching up with you next week, Michael. Be well.
Okay.